Hi and welcome to Pink Paradox Reads. I'm Lisa, also known as Pink Paradox, and in this video I'll be talking about the books that I read in the month of May. I'll start off with the only physical book that I read this month. This is Cursed, an anthology edited by Marie O'Regan and Paul Kane, and this consists of 20 stories by people like Neil Gaiman, Christina Henry, and Christopher Golden. And they are all twists on curses. So this has dark fairy tales and folk tales and that kind of thing. As per usual with this kind of anthology, it's a pretty mixed bag. Not all the stories were able to keep me interested. The ones that were more straight fantasy were not for me because I'm not really a fantasy reader. But the standout story for me was Henry and the Snakewood Box, which is by M.R. Carey, who wrote The Girl with All the Gifts. And in this story, the titular Henry, he picks up a demon in a box in a charity shop. And this is a demon who grants unlimited wishes. And of course, that does not go without repercussions. I really liked this story because it was quite humorous and different from all the others. The rest of the stories were, like I said, a mixed bag. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. On Kindle this month, I read The Body on the Beach by Anna Johansson. This is the first, I believe, in a series of murder mystery books. And it is set on Amrum, which is an island in the North Sea, a German island in the North Sea. And the main protagonist, Dia Lena Lorentzen, was born on this island, and she has since left to go work on the mainland, and she has sort of turned her back on her life on Amrum. But when a man is found dead and suspected murdered on the beach, she is called in to investigate. I really love the setting of this book. I looked up the islands and they really look like the kind of place that I would like to go on vacation. It was just stunningly beautiful. The book itself was a little bit boring. I didn't think the plot was very interesting. I didn't think the characters had much chemistry. It is translated from German to English, and that might have something to do with my enjoyment of the book. Sometimes a lot of things can get lost in translation. Maybe I would have liked this one better if I was able to read it in the original German, but unfortunately my German is not good enough for that. So this one I gave 2 out of 5 stars. Also on Kindle I read the Blumhouse Book of Nightmares, The Haunted City. And if you are a horror movie fan, then you definitely know Blumhouse Productions. They are behind some of the biggest and most popular horror movies in recent times. I didn't know that they actually publish books also, so when I found this short story collection I was really excited. The stories in here are written mostly by screenwriters. We also have some really big names like Eli Roth and Ethan Hawke. Unfortunately, there is no Get Out in this book. There is no The Invisible Man. There isn't even a Happy Death Day. My favorite story of the bunch was called Hellhole, and it was written by Christopher Denham. And it's an Insidious-like story about a couple who moves in with their son into, shall we say, a fixer-upper in Brooklyn that turns out to have possibly a portal to hell in it. And there's also a really creepy doll. I thought this one had some serious like horror movie vibes to it. Unfortunately, the other ones were not as good, and I felt that the quality of the stories went down as the book progressed. So this was a bit of a disappointment, unfortunately. I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. On audio this month, I listened to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And this is a favorite of mine. I actually don't know how many times I've read this book before. If you are unfamiliar with the plot of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's about an Englishman called Arthur Dent who wakes up one morning only to find out that the world is being wiped out because some aliens are building an intergalactic bypass. Fortunately, he gets to hitch a ride with his friend Ford Prefect, who's also an alien. I usually go to the UK on holiday every year, and of course this year I don't get to do that, so I wanted to listen to this one to cheer myself up. This is real comfort listening for me. I couldn't find the version that I had listened to before, the one read by Douglas Adams, but I did find one read by Stephen Fry, and of course he is excellent. So yeah, this was a really nice comfort listen. And I can still very much relate to Marvin the Robot. Also on audio, I listened to The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. And in this book, we first off, we meet the character Viv, who's a young girl in 1982. She dreams of moving to New York City, and to afford to do that, she takes a job as a night clerk at the Sundown Motel in a town called Fell, New York. And there she encounters lots of scary things, both corporeal and non-corporeal. And then the story switches to present day, and we meet her niece Carly, and we find out that Viv actually disappeared in 1982, and Carly is determined to find out what happened to her aunt. So she ends up taking the same job as a night clerk at the Sundown Motel. This one took me a surprisingly long time to finish. It wasn't really because the story itself was uninteresting, but I think it had to do with the narrators. There are two narrators, one for Viv and one for Carly. And one of them I wasn't really happy with. I have this thing about female narrators doing male voices that can be really annoying. So I think that was the reason it took me so long to finish it. But all in all, I thought it was a pretty interesting thriller. If you are a true crime fan and you don't mind a little bit of supernatural mixed in with your thriller, then you might like this one. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. It also had a lot of Stephen King references, which I liked. And speaking of Stephen King, for this month's The Shades of Orange Patreon book club, we read Christine. And this was a new one for me. I'm a fairly recent Stephen King devotee, so I haven't really read that many of his early works. You've heard about this one before. It's the one about the killer car. But in case you are unfamiliar, this is a story about a teenager named Arnie, who buys an old hunk-of-junk car named Christine. And as he is fixing up the car, it seems like it is fixing him up in a way. And Christine, has a real problem with anyone else getting close to Arnie. I really, really enjoyed this book. I like the fact that the majority of the story was told through the eyes of Dennis, who is Arnie's best friend. I really love the friendship aspect of this book. I really think that that's one of the strong things that Stephen King does in his books. He writes really strong friendship stories. Some of the other members in the book club felt that this book got a little bit too long or long-winded, and that is a fairly normal complaint to have about Stephen King's books. They do tend to get a little bit wordy, but I didn't really feel like it was too long. I just really, really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars to Christy. Also on Scribd, I read 12 Nights at Rotterdam by J.W. Ocker. And this is a haunted house story about a travel writer named Felix Alsey, who specializes in writing books about staying in haunted places. And he sets out to spend 13 nights in an infamous haunted house called Rotterdam Mansion. And along the way, he is joined by his best friend Thomas, and they spend the time drinking and playing movie trivia games until the scary stuff starts to happen. I really wanted to like this book. I was hoping that it would be something along the lines of The Last Days of Jack Sparks by Jason Arnott, which is one of my favorite contemporary horror novels. But it just fell a little bit flat for me. The meta aspect and the constant mentions of horror movies and horror movie tropes, it just became a bit too much. I love horror movies, but I felt that that aspect of the way the story was told just took over too much. And here is a bit that I feel sums up the whole story for me. We were bordered by corn as far as you could see on two sides, while the other two sides butted against the most suburban neighborhood you could find. The burbs on one side, children of the corn on the other. Courtney Gaines is in both those movies, said Thomas. I don't think J.W. Ocker is a bad writer. On the contrary, I'm very interested to see what he comes up with next. But unfortunately, this was not the book for me. I ended up giving this one 2 out of 5 stars. The final book that I'm going to be talking about is The Perfume by Caroline B. Cooney, and I read this in preparation for the upcoming episode of the Don't Point That Horror at Me podcast, in which they would be discussing this book. So this is in the Point Horror series. If you are unfamiliar with Point Horror, it was a 90s sort of teenager horror series. And this book is about a 15-year-old girl named Dove, who is very nice and pleasant and not very rebellious until she tries the new It perfume called Venom, which unleashes her evil side, quite literally. This book is bananas. It's incredibly dramatic. There's a lot of talk about Egyptian mythology and evil twins, and it's very, very heavy on talk of mental illness and psychiatric treatment, and it's not always handled very well. It's very different from the other point horror books that I read in my teenage years. Those were more like stalker, slashery type books. This is a very different type of horror. The kind where there could be an actual ancient evil inside of this girl, or maybe she is just seriously mentally ill. My 15-year-old self would have loved it. My current self was not that keen. I gave this one 2 out of 5 stars. So there you have the books that I recently read. I'll leave Goodreads links to all of them in the description in case you want to check them out. And if you like bookish videos like this one, unboxings and horror movie hauls, please subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.